Wyoming Territory, spring of 1879. The sky above Carbon County burned the same color as the flames that swallowed her home. The wind howled down from the Elk Mountain Range, whipping smoke and ash across the prairie as Beatrice Ellsworth stumbled barefoot through the tall grass, the hem of her nightdress torn, her palms raw from falling. Behind her, the only life she had ever known collapsed into blackened timber and blistering heat. Her father's tools, her mother's books, the table where they'd eaten every supper since she was a girl, it was all gone. She stopped when her legs gave out. Her breath came in short gasps and her chest felt like it had caved in. The sky spun. Then, through the haze, she saw a man on horseback riding hard, dust trailing behind him. He reined in sharply. His boots hit the ground before the horse had fully stopped. "Madam," his voice was low and steady. "Are you hurt?" Beatrice shook her head, though tears streaked her cheeks. "The house, the whole place, I've lost all." The man crouched beside her. His face was sun-worn, but his eyes were clear blue and calm. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not me," he said. "You still got me." That was the first thing Dalton Hayes ever said to her. He carried her up onto his horse without another word, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. His ranch sat several miles to the west, nestled in a low valley where the grass grew thick and green. The sun was just beginning to rise behind them when they crested the ridge. The smoke from her home was still visible, curling toward the heavens like a funeral prayer. Dalton did not ask questions. He did not press her to speak. He only handed her a cup of coffee once she was warm and sitting by his fire, and left her in peace while he fed the stock. She watched him from the window, broad-shouldered, quiet, capable. A man who moved like the earth itself, steady and sure. That night, she lay on a cot by the hearth with a wool blanket pulled to her chin, staring into the flickering light. Dalton sat at the table across the room, mending a saddle strap. "I can work," she said suddenly. He looked up. "If I stay here," she went on, "I will not be a burden." "You are not a burden," he said. "I have nothing," she said. "I do not even have shoes." Dalton stood and crossed the room. He knelt beside her cot. "You have a name, you have your breath, you have your soul." "That is not nothing." Beatrice blinked quickly, but a tear escaped anyway. He reached up, brushed it away with the back of his knuckle. "You can work if it makes you feel better, but you are safe here, Beatrice. That is all that matters right now." She nodded once, too tired to argue. 3 days passed before she could stand without shaking. She helped Dalton in the kitchen first, then in the chicken yard. She found herself watching him when he was not looking, how he fed the horses, how he untied knots with patience, how he never raised his voice. By the end of the week, she had a pair of boots he found in the cellar and a cotton dress mended from one of his mother's old trunks. Her hair was no longer tangled, and her eyes were clearer. Dalton came in from the barn one afternoon with his shirt rolled up at the sleeves and dirt on his forearms. She was kneading bread dough. "You sure you ever made bread before?" he asked with a faint smile. "Once or twice," she said. "It was not my favorite chore." He leaned against the counter. "Funny, you look like you were made for it," she flushed. "Do not tease me, Mr. Hayes. I am not," he said. "I just keep noticing things is all." "Like what?" He looked down at her hands in the dough. "Like how quiet it got around here before you showed up. And how different it feels now." Beatrice froze, her hands stilled in the flour. She looked up at him slowly, her heart thudding. He stepped closer, just enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I do not want you to leave," he said. "I do not have anywhere to go," she whispered. "Well," he said, "then that works out just fine." That night she walked out to the fence line after dinner, her boots crunching softly in the grass. Dalton joined her without a word. They stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the sun drop behind the hills. "I keep thinking about the fire," she said quietly. "All those years, everything Mama and Papa built." Dalton reached over and took her hand. "You cannot build the same house again," he said, "but you can start something new." She turned her face toward him. His thumb brushed over the side of her hand. "I do not know how to start over," she said. "You already did," he replied, "the minute you got on my horse." She squeezed his hand, and for the first time since the fire, she smiled. The lambing started early that year, a week before the thaw reached the lower pastures. Beatrice stood in the chill of morning with a rough woven shawl tight around her shoulders, watching Dalton coax a struggling ewe to her feet. The animal's sides heaved and her legs trembled, but Dalton kept his voice low and steady, his hand firm beneath her belly. It was the first time Beatrice had seen him speak aloud to anything besides her. "You talk to them?" she asked, crouching beside the pen rail. Dalton didn't glance over. "They don't listen, but they calm some. That's enough." He guided the ewe back toward the rest, then wiped his hands on his trousers and turned to her. "You warm enough," she nodded, though her fingertips ached. "I wanted to see if the black-faced one made it through the night." Dalton tilted his head toward the far corner. "She did, had twins just before dawn." Beatrice stepped through the gate, her boots sinking into straw. The lambs were curled together, still damp, their mother licking them with slow, deliberate strokes. She knelt down, careful not to startle them. "They're smaller than I imagined," she said. Dalton leaned on the post behind her. "First-time mother." "She did well." "They're quiet," she said after a while. Not for long. She looked up at him. "You were right about starting new." He didn't answer right off. A wind pushed through the valley, lifting the edge of her shawl. Dalton reached to tuck it back down, his fingers grazing her collarbone. "I've been thinking on something," he said. She waited. "There's a schoolhouse in Rollins," he continued. "They'll reopen it next month. Teacher left last fall, but the board's been advertising. Thought maybe that might be something you'd want." Beatrice straightened slowly. "Why would you think that?" "I saw the way you read through that almanac yesterday." He crossed his arms. "Most folks glance. You traced your finger down the planting tables like you were memorizing scripture." She flushed, but didn't look away. "I taught the neighbors' boys to read when I was 16. Their mother paid me with eggs and sewing thread." Dalton nodded once. "Then you've done it before." "I don't know if I'd be good at it." "You are good at it," he said. She studied him, unsure how to carry the weight of belief when it wasn't her own. "Would you mind if I left then?" she asked softly. He held her gaze for a long time. "I would," he said, "but I'd never stop you." She exhaled, and something in her chest unlatched. "I don't want to leave," she said. Dalton stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Then don't." That night she sat beside him on the porch, her knees drawn up beneath her skirt. The stars had come out in a spill of silver, quiet and sharp. "I used to think I'd marry a man like my father," she said, voice low. "He was kind but distant, always worried about what needed fixing." Dalton turned his head. "You don't want someone like that?" "No," she picked at the fringe of her shawl. "I want someone who sees me. Not just what I can do." Dalton shifted closer, the wood creaking beneath him. "I see you, Beatrice." She didn't speak, just turned her hand palm up between them. He took it without hesitation. His thumbs settled in the hollow beneath hers, and they sat like that until the fire inside burned low and the cold crept in from the hills. Neither of them let go. The river thawed in April, the ice breaking apart in slow, groaning sheets that drifted past the edge of Dalton's land. Beatrice stood on the bank one morning, skirt hem damp with dew, watching the water carry away the last of winter's stillness. The current didn't rush, it moved steady, like it had all the time in the world. Behind her, Dalton's footsteps pressed into the soft earth. "You come here often?" he asked. "Only when I need to remember that things keep moving." He nodded once, stuffing his hands into his coat pockets. "I used to come down here when my brother died. Couldn't make sense of it in the house." She looked over, surprised. "I didn't know you had a brother." "Elias," he said. He was 3 years older, shot outside Fort Steele on a cattle drive, too far from help. Beatrice stared out at the water. "I'm sorry." Dalton's voice stayed quiet. "He wasn't like me. He was loud, always chasing something: money, a girl, a fight. But he'd have given the shirt off his back to anyone who needed it." She reached down, picked up a flat stone, and sent it skipping. It bounced twice before sinking. "I used to wish I'd been born braver," she said. "When the fire started, I froze. I just stood there while the roof fell in." Dalton didn't answer right away. "You got out," he said. That's not nothing. She turned to face him. Do you believe people can change? I think some folks don't want to, he said, but the ones who do. They already have. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of wet soil and pine. Beatrice pulled her shawl tighter. I want more than surviving. Dalton stepped closer, his voice low and certain. Then you'll have it. That evening, Beatrice climbed the ladder to the loft with a stack of sewing mending in her arms. She'd taken to repairing Dalton's work shirts in the evenings, her stitches small and neat. From the window, she could see the last light slipping behind the ridge, casting the barn in gold. Did I ever tell you I was supposed to marry a boy from over in Saratoga? She said as Dalton poured water into the wash basin. No, he replied. Did you want to? I thought I did. He had a fine smile and nice boots, but he didn't ask what I read or what I thought. He just liked the way I looked on Sundays. Dalton dried his hands on a rag. You deserve better than that. She looked down at the shirt in her lap. I didn't know that then. He took a seat across from her. You know it now, I'm beginning to. The oil lamp between them flickered. Dalton's eyes stayed on hers. I don't know what kind of man I was before you came here, he said, but I like the one I am when you're near. Beatrice felt her breath catch, but it wasn't fear. It was something steadier, something that settled deep. You've been alone a long time, she said, so have you. She reached across the table, laid her fingers lightly on his wrist. I don't want to be any more, she said. Dalton turned his hand over and held hers. You won't be, he said. The next morning, she found a small wooden box on the windowsill above the sink. Inside lay a silver brooch shaped like a sprig of wheat, the kind her mother once wore on her Sunday dress. Dalton didn't speak of it, and she didn't ask how he'd come by it. She only pinned it to her collar, and when he noticed, he tipped his hat and said, "Looks like it belongs." That afternoon, they rode out together to mend the fence along the northern boundary, their shadows long on the grass. No one passed them on the road. Just the wind, the birds, and the quiet rhythm of two lives beginning to braid together, strand by strand. Late May brought a stretch of dry days and hard sun, the kind that cracked the earth and turned creek beds to dust. Beatrice took to rising before the heat, carrying a pail out to the garden behind the house, her sleeves rolled to the elbow and her hair braided back tight. The beans were sprouting slow and the lettuce had started to curl at the edge from thirst, but she kept tending anyway. It steadied her. Dalton returned from town with a coil of wire and a parcel wrapped in brown paper beneath his arm. He set both on the table and poured a mug of water before dropping into the chair across from her. They're building a telegraph line up past Medicine Bow, he said. Said it should reach the post office by end of summer. Beatrice wiped her hands on her apron. That'll bring more folks. Already has. Saw 2 wagons headed north on the ridge. One had a baby's cradle tied to the back. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. Did it trouble you? More people coming, Dalton shrugged. Long as they know how to read the sky and keep to their word, they can make a home like anyone else. She glanced at the parcel. What's that? He pushed it toward her. Stopped at the mercantile. Figured you might need more than one dress if you're going to be seen as a proper teacher. Beatrice opened the paper slowly. Inside was a length of blue calico with a pattern of tiny stars tucked between vines. She touched it like it might vanish. I never asked for this. I know, he said. But I wanted to. Her voice was quiet. That's the part I don't understand. Dalton leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. You think you have to earn kindness, but you don't, not from me. Beatrice looked down at the cloth. I don't know how to accept things without giving something back. You already have, he said. The silence between them held, soft and full. That evening she sat on the porch with a needle and thread, pinning the bodice pattern to the fabric, measuring twice before cutting. Dalton worked in the yard, replacing the hinges on the gate. Neither spoke much. But the quiet between them had changed. It was no longer filled with caution, but with ease. Later, as the sun slipped low, she set down her sewing and walked barefoot to where he stood. The school board sent word, she said. They want me to come in next week to meet with them. Dalton wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. You going? I think I will, he nodded. I'll hitch the wagon, ride you in. She hesitated. They might ask where I'm staying. Tell them the truth. And what is that? She asked. Dalton met her eyes. You're with me. Beatrice's hand found his, fingers curling between his calloused ones. It feels like I've been here longer than I have. Time moves different when it's right. She leaned her head against his shoulder. The air smelled of sun, warmed grass and wood smoke, and the distant howl of a coyote echoed off the hills. I used to think being alone meant being safe, she said. Dalton turned his face toward her hair. I used to think that too. They stood that way until the last light faded. No promises spoken, none needed, they were already being kept. The morning Beatrice rode into Rollins for the school board meeting. The sky was pale with high, streaked clouds, and the scent of sage hung in the air. Dalton had tied a ribbon around the reins of the team before she came outside, a simple blue one, the same color as the calico she wore. She said nothing, only touched the ribbon once before climbing into the wagon. The ride took over an hour, the wheels jostling over dry ruts and last year's gravel. Dalton didn't fill the silence with talk, but his steady presence beside her was enough. When the town's single steeple came into view, Beatrice laid her hand on his arm. I don't need you to come inside with me, she said. I know, he replied and helped her down anyway. Inside the schoolhouse, the 3 board members sat on mismatched chairs behind a borrowed desk. They asked questions: how many pupils she could manage, whether she could handle older boys, if she planned to teach geography or stick to reading and sums. Beatrice answered each one without hesitation, her voice clear, her back straight. When they asked where she lived, she met their gazes without blinking. I live west of the river, she said, with Dalton Hayes. The older woman on the board gave a small, unreadable nod. That's a good, quiet stretch of land. Beatrice didn't mention the fire. She didn't mention the nights before Dalton or the ache of loss. She spoke only of what she knew now, that children could learn under a firm hand and a patient heart, and that she had both. They offered her the position before she left the room. Outside, Dalton stood near the wagon, speaking with a man Beatrice didn't recognize, tall, with a crooked belt and weathered boots. She paused when she reached them. Elias's old friend, Dalton said, gesturing. Name's Frank Bell. He drives freight now over the pass. Frank tipped his hat. Heard you were setting roots here. Thought I'd see for myself. Dalton nodded once. You've seen. Beatrice sensed an old grief between them, not raw but not forgotten. Frank turned to her. He never said much about himself back then. Guess he was waiting on the right person to say it to. Dalton shifted slightly, not uncomfortable but unsure. Beatrice stepped closer to him. Some things don't need saying out loud. They rode home in the hush of mid-afternoon, the wind soft and dry. Halfway back, Dalton spoke, his voice low. I'd like to build something behind the house. A room with windows on both sides and shelves for your books. She turned her head. What would you do with such a room? Watch you in it. A flush crept up her neck, but she smiled. Then I'd better have more books. That evening, she packed her few belongings into the chest he'd cleared for her. The brooch rested atop her folded shawl. She placed it in the drawer beside Dalton's shaving brush and closed it gently. They ate supper on the porch, the sky streaked with the last of the sun. He passed her the last biscuit without asking. She poured his coffee without thinking. Later, he stood behind her as she washed the plates, his hands warm on her hips. I've been thinking, he said into the space just above her ear. I want you to stay, not just for the school, not just for a season. She didn't turn. I'm already staying, she said. I want more than that. Beatrice dried her hands and turned to face him. Then ask me. Dalton didn't kneel. He didn't fetch a ring. He just looked at her, steady and full, and said, Will you marry me, Beatrice? She didn't hesitate. Yes. They wed beneath the cottonwood near the barn, with only the wind and the chickens bearing witness. That night, the fire burned low while she unpinned her hair and he unbuttoned his collar. He touched her as if every inch of her told a story he wanted to learn by heart, and she kissed him like he was the first thing she'd ever chosen for herself. Come August, Beatrice rang the school bell on her first morning and watched as children filed in, some barefoot, some shy, all curious. She taught them to read by the light of the tall windows Dalton had built with his own hands. Evenings, they sat by the hearth with books open between them, her head on his shoulder, his feet crossed by hers. The land was still dry some years, and the lambs didn't always come easy, but there was always supper, always warmth, always the comfort of choosing each other again and again. In the quiet seasons, when the snow came early and stayed long, they kept close. She wrote letters to far-off friends she'd never met, and he carved a cradle from pine that smelled of sap and sunlight. Their first son was born in the spring, strong and wide-eyed, with fingers that curled tight around Beatrice's thumb. Dalton held him as if the world had become small enough to carry in one arm. They named him Elias. And in that house, on that stretch of quiet land west of the river, love lived long and without condition. It grew in the spaces between chores and laughter, in the hush before daylight, and in the steady, silent promise of two hands joined across every season that came after.